welcome. I'm Nira Berry, your host of Happy and Healthy, where we explore and discover all the many ways of keeping you feeling happy and healthy. And remember to stay tuned to the end where I share my What's Good to Know segment. So today we have a special guest, and my guest is Dr. Tobie Beckerman, and she's a women's health specialist. Thank you for coming, Dr. Beckerman.
Thank you so much for having me.
She's an OBGYN, and she's got a lot of really good information to share with us about what are like women should know about their health and just in this day and age, everything that we should be aware of. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, what inspired you to go into women's health?
So it's actually interesting because when I went to medical school, women's health OBGYN was actually the very last thing on my list. For whatever reason, I never really had a relationship with a gynecologist and thought I'd be a pediatrician or a family doctor, the Marcus Welby kind. So when I did my clinical rotations, I said, okay, I'll do OBGYN first because it doesn't matter if I'm any good at it. I can flub up a little bit and then I'll start to shine when I do the rotations I like. And I just literally fell in love with it. Every part of it, delivering babies, taking care of women, operating, the primary care aspect, the office procedures. I really just loved it. And it was a no-brainer from there. So it's been fantastic. I've been in practice for 30 years now and love it. Very passionate about it and just love it.
Well, so you probably have a lot of good information about what women should know, and let's just start off with that. Like, what are some preventive strategies that women could use to keep themselves in good health and to live a quality life? Like, what do you recommend women should do?
So I think a lot of the basics. The three biggies I always think about is keep your weight stable, make sure you're exercising, and really evaluate your life for stress and how you're living and what's bringing you up and what's bringing you down and strategies to help in that area. But those are just cliche-ish kind of things. So yeah. I like to delve into it a little bit further because weight's a real big one. And so I have my own little personal strategies about how to really get a hold of your weight. So I tell my patients to really focus a lot on, number one, setting a realistic goal. If you're not a little twiggy, you don't need to be a little twiggy. Set a realistic goal. What weight do you want to be? What feels comfortable to you? And then work toward that. And there's no speed. You don't have to lose weight in a few days or a few months, which everybody wants, that instant gratification. Just set a really realistic goal over the long term. Focus on making sure that there's days that you are a bit restrictive, that you eat a lot of protein, fruits, and vegetables and really cut down on the carbs because I really think that makes a tremendous difference. And then there's days that you treat yourself and you eat whatever you want. And I think almost everybody, if you have times where you can eat what you want and you can indulge a little bit, it's much easier to be strict on the stricter end. When I was a nutrition major, and initially you learn in terms of eating, always burn more than you take in. And that is true oftentimes, but mostly when you're younger. So for my teens and my 20-year-old patients, even 30 sometimes, that can be helpful, burn more than you take in. But
and the weight part of it is really also affects the heart and other aspects that we should be concerned about?
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. It affects the heart. It affects you in general. Oftentimes when people are much heavier than they want to be, they don't feel so good. And that whole mind-body connection, I think, is crucial.
Does it affect the hormones too?
I think that your weight can affect the hormones. Hormones can affect your weight.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's multifactorial. It's it can be a myriad of things that actually is affecting your weight, and your weight and your attitude and your mood and your activity level, maybe because of your weight. That affects the entire picture of your health. Absolutely. It all spirals together.
Yeah.
Right. Which takes me actually to the next thing, which is about exercise.
Yeah.
So I'm huge on exercise in the sense of moving. If you can get to the gym regularly, if that's your thing, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't make that the be-all, end-all by any means, because I think as long as you have a perspective that I need to move. Park far, take the stairs instead of the elevator. If you left something upstairs, get up and get it.
It's important to keep those muscles because, you know, as we age, you need them, or even just to be able to do basic tasks, you know, it's important for all that. So what are some other preventive things that, that women could use? Because, you know, we hear about like a lot of health things, but, you know, sometimes it's different for women than for men. Is there anything that you can recommend?
So in terms of just overall preventive strategies, so number one, I think you need to find a doctor. And of course, I'm a doctor, so maybe a little biased, but I do think that there's so much out there in the media these days, and you read in magazines, and it's hard to know where you fall, what's really right for you. So if you have somebody that can guide you in terms of what works better for you, particularly as an individual person, and what doesn't, I think that's important. So finding somebody that you can trust and lean on to help give you some strategies is important. And then for women, let's start with just talking about the annual GYN exam, because there's actually been some controversy about that, whether women really still need to go to the doctor every year and to get their annual exam. And there's been some articles that are written, well, maybe you can just go to your internist, or you don't really need a pap smear, which we should talk a little bit about in a minute. You don't really need that, so why go to your gynecologist? And I think that's a big...
So tell us why.
Right, so exactly. So I actually think it's a big mistake. So firstly, I think that patients are very close with their gynecologist as a general rule. There's a real intimate relationship between the two, and there's trust. And I think it's so important for women to be able to open up to her doctor, and particularly her gynecologist, about everything in her life, about what's going on with her physically, what's going on with her medically, what's going on with her emotionally, what's happening at home, what's happening in her intimate life, even what's happening with her friends and stresses and work. And your GYN can understand you on that kind of level. And I think when you have that kind of trust, the doctor's going to be able to sense things going on in your life, sense certain stresses, maybe pick up that your mood's off compared to where it was, or there's really a lot of stress with your marriage and the intimacy, and how are they going to help with that? So I think that's a gynecology role. And I think that's very special, and you can really only get that with your gynecologist.
Yeah, and I know a lot of women that the only exam they may have on a yearly basis is with a gynecologist. Like, they don't go to any other doctor. So it is really important that they go in and that the doctor really knows them. And
very much so.
Yeah,
very
and
much.
Understands them. So if are there any other
Let me tell you a little anecdote about
Okay.
the annual exam. So I read a really great article, and it was written by a doctor herself, and she said, my gynecologist saved my life. And so the story again, she went into her gynecologist for a routine exam, and the GYN examined her and thought she felt maybe a little bit of a mass. And she sent her for testing, and it turned out at the end of the day, she had colon cancer. So it wasn't even a gynecologic type of disease process, but the fact that her GYN knew her, that she did a thorough exam, that she went to her gynecologist, just like you said, most women will see their gynecologist primarily as their primary care doctor. And she went and had further testing done because of the trust she had in her gynecologist. They had a real relationship, and her gynecologist basically saved her life.
Wow.
And so I think that bond and that relationship and that intimacy you have and that trust is going to keep people coming back. And if you don't have it, people may not have the tendency, particularly women, to go to the doctor on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So I think it's crucial. I really do.
Well, that's so interesting. So, how often should people have like the pap smears or cervical exam?
So that's a very hot topic these days, and I think that goes a little bit in terms of when people equate often having a pap smear with having a gynecologic visit.
Yeah.
So if they're reading in the media now, and if I have 3 normal pap smears in a row, I don't need to have a pap smear anymore. They have that set in their mind, well, I don't need to go to the gynecologist anymore. And the two are actually separate. So a pap smear is a screening test for cervical cancer, and it's a great screening test for cervical cancer. And not only do we do the pap smear now, but we do HPV testing. HPV stands for human papillomavirus. It's commonly known as genital warts, and we know that HPV really is the cause of cervical cancer. And so cervical cancer is fortunately on the decline because of all our pap smear screening, and also because of the HPV vaccine, which I think we should talk about for a minute too.
Yeah, so let's just divert for a second and go to that. Is that called Gardasil? Is that what that's called?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the Gardasil vaccine. It came out, I believe, in 2006, and it is basically one of the only real cancer prevention vaccines that we actually have.
It's amazing.
It is amazing.
Like, you think that everybody would want to get it, but it's only very specifically for women, or is it also for men?
No, it's actually now given for men too. When it first came out, it was for women, and it was approved for women between the age of 9 and 26.
Okay.
And now it also is even not just offered for men, but actually the pediatricians really do a lot of talking and counseling and trying to push people to have the HPV vaccine.
And for the men, is it also between those ages, or is
Yes, it is also between those ages. But it's very interesting. I got called last week by a high schooler, and she asked if she could interview me briefly for the HPV vaccine. She wanted to write a story for her high school. And she was giving me some questions about sexually transmitted infections and so forth. And she actually told me something that was really remarkable. So she said, you know, I did a poll in our school about the percentages of kids that would get the HPV vaccine, and about 20% of the kids said they would not get the HPV vaccine. And that, to me, is just probably a lot of misinformation. You know,
and that's a shame,
it is a
because
shame.
they found that that can directly affect whether or not they get the cancer.
Right. We actually have a preventive vaccine against cervical cancer. Now,
That's amazing.
it's not 100%. It's about 90% protective. You still need to go, and that's also a misconception. I've had younger kids come in, and I'll diagnose them with HPV, and they'll say, but I got the vaccine.
Yeah.
And the vaccine is...
I guess they got it too late. Maybe that's what it is.
No, it's that there are many, many types of papillomavirus. And the vaccine, the original vaccine, only gave you four virus types that it protected against. This newer vaccine gives you 9 virus types.
Oh.
So it protects a lot more, but it still is a 90% protection and not 100%. But the good news for papillomavirus is that probably about 50% of people under the age of 30 have HPV. 90% of them are going to clear it by themselves before they're 30. So I don't like for patients to come in terrified about having HPV, worried, all these misconceptions. It's really important to have a balance and to give them some peace of mind. It's likely going to go away. Don't be upset. We're going to follow you a little more closely. But the majority of the time, it's going to go away by itself with your own immune system kicking in.
So that's really good to know, and I like that part about, you know, that you don't want to stress everybody out, that it's important to just keep calm and listen to Dr. Beckerman.
Right.
So we're going to continue speaking about all this wonderful stuff and even more stuff, and we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue speaking with Dr. Beckerman and find out even more good stuff about women's health. So I'm Nira Berry, your host, and you've been watching Happy and Healthy, and we'll be right back. Hi, welcome back. I'm Nira Berry, your host of Happy and Healthy, and we've been talking about women's health and what are some of the things that we need to know, and we're speaking with Dr. Beckerman. So Dr. Beckerman, so let's continue. We were talking about some of the proactive things that women can do. So what else do you recommend that we can do?
So I strongly recommend lab work. I think that's important. I don't know if it has to be done every year. It depends on the age. I think older women probably should have lab work done yearly. Younger women maybe every 1 to 2 years.
Just general lab work? Or?
So I think blood counts are really important, even though that's just, people don't even think of that as sort of a serious lab test, but it is important, particularly for women, because we forget that we menstruate every month. Some people have very heavy periods, and they're going to lose a lot of blood, and month after month after month, all of a sudden they become anemic, and nobody ever looks at that. So routine blood counts are very important, as are screens for heart disease, cholesterol, vitamin D levels. Vitamin D is a big one, because there is a lot of vitamin D deficiency that we're finding. And I think one of the bigger reasons is that a lot of people are staying away from dairy products. And we know that vitamin D is supplemented in milk, but it's not supplemented in a lot of other foods. It's also not found naturally in a lot of foods. Egg yolks.
What about the sunshine?
So sunshine is great for conversion of vitamin D. We know that's important, but the dermatologist will definitely get on your case for that one, because we really recommend that patients wear sunscreen. Skin cancers are something we really want to prevent, and people talk about slathering sunscreen on all the time. And if you are wearing a good SPF, which we absolutely recommend, you're not going to get the same vitamin D conversion. So it is important to have levels checked. And we know that vitamin D is very important for bones and for bone health. Vitamin D, calcium, exercise, 3 very important things to do. But there's a lot of research being done now, the relationship between vitamin D and vitamin D deficiencies with diabetes, with multiple sclerosis, with emotional changes. I don't know that any of that research has panned out at all. But suffice it to say, if we know it's going to protect bones, we should get on board. And if it does the other things, if it does the other things, then that's great.
And, you know, speaking of bones, about for osteoporosis, doing the DEXA scan.
Absolutely. Once a woman becomes menopausal, that is where she will have her biggest risk in the first 5 years of being menopausal. So we start doing screenings then, and that's absolutely crucial. And in terms of screening for heart disease, so there are many tests that we do, simple tests, besides cholesterol, something called a high sensitivity C-reactive protein that can really be a nice screen and marker, particularly in women.
And that's a blood test.
That is a blood test, very simple with routine work. And I think it's very important for women to realize that although we talk about breast cancer, which is crucial, of course, and we talk about all of the diseases related specifically to women, that cardiovascular disease and heart disease is still the leading cause of death in women. And so it's so important to know your family history. Are you one of those that has a higher risk because of that?
I don't think that most women understand that really the leading cause of death, like what you just said, is heart disease for women.
Right.
Because you don't hear about that.
We don't hear about it.
I hear about that for men all the time.
All the time.
And also it seems like most of the research is like based on men as well, and the symptoms and all that.
It is often because it occurs in men at any age. Oftentimes you'll hear about men in their 40s who have cardiovascular symptoms and have a heart attack and even have sudden death because of it. But it's not as common that you hear about that in women, and that's in part because we have estrogen that protects us. Once you become menopausal and you no longer have that protection, your risk does go up. And I think it's also really important to realize that the typical symptoms in men, the chest pain, the radiation of pain down the arm, the radiation of pain into the neck, are things that women can get, but not exclusive. Women also can get a significant amount of fatigue, more, and now I'm going to hear everybody say, oh my goodness, I have heart disease. I'm so tired. You got to go screen me for heart disease. So no, it's not that. So I'll tell you a good story. So I had a patient, and she was with her mother in New York, and her mother, very active, young 70-year-old, and they were walking the city, and they were shopping, and they were having a great time, and getting ready to go out to a nice dinner they were looking forward to. And the mom was just sitting on the couch, and she said, I just can't get up. And they were surprised because it wasn't her typical MO. She was able to really go and sustain. And she just said, you guys go without me. We've just been walking too much today. And they thought that really probably was the issue. But her symptoms persisted. And they took her and got her checked out immediately the next day. And she had significant heart disease. Wow. So it is something.
So was that just an overall feeling of fatigue?
Just extreme severe fatigue, way out of the range of your norm. Because I would think
that sounds like a flu symptom.
It could be. It could definitely be a flu symptom, but I have to tell you, half my patients who see me every day tell me how tired they are.
Yeah.
Women multitask.
Yeah.
We're doing
young mothers,
so many things.
lack of sleep from work,
Absolutely.
stress.
The combination of running and job and
our world just being busy, 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 busy.
Absolutely. So don't think
So
that
now everybody's
just because,
freaking out.
Right. Don't think just because you're tired, because that's not the case. But as you get older, and it's more important not for yourself, I think, but actually to think about it for somebody you know. If you're out with someone, she's older, there may be some history, keep that in mind. That's
so if
really
it's like a sudden
that's
change.
The take-home message is if somebody fits a profile where you might be more concerned about heart disease, keep that person in mind. Not thinking I'm 48 years old and I am so exhausted and I better run to the cardiologist. That's not the message I want to send. But keep it in mind when you hear about an older person that also all of a sudden has a real change in their level of activity.
Okay,
So,
so that's really good information.
Yeah.
And I know there's so many new advances and a lot of other things that we should know about.
So breast cancer screening, absolutely important. Mammograms on a regular basis. Colon cancer screenings with colonoscopy, absolutely important. Screening for sexually transmitted infections is not just a teenage or 20-year-old thing. I think as you get older, particularly with HPV and papillomavirus, if you're in a new relationship, if you're in the single world, all the STDs really need to be screened for as well.
Unless you get the partner to be screened too, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, all of a sudden people have to rethink those kinds of relationships and those kinds of risk factors.
Yeah.
And then family history. Just ask where your, not just your genetics lie, but where your family history lies. They don't always go hand in hand. So if you have a parent or you have uncles, you have aunts, you have siblings that have had a strong family history of heart disease or diabetes or different kinds of cancers, delve into it a little bit because I think that's so important in terms of evaluating what you might need for yourself.
And it's important to go to the doctor with that information because what may not seem like something that is, you know, if it falls on your father's side of the family, maybe on the, you know, and your father had something, it may come out differently for a female. And so it's up to, you know, it's good information for the doctor to know that, I bet.
Absolutely. And it may be that just because the male side have it, you may have the same risk, or it may be that that particular disease process or medical process would not be transmitted from one side to the other. So there's no question that when you go to your doctor, a good family history is very important.
So that leads us to all the new information about genetics. And
genetics is, I think, really going to be our wave of the future. So we are screening so much more. When women are getting pregnant, we're offering so many genetic screens prenatally for those patients. And there are so many genetic screenings for cancers now. So again, delve into the family history, find out where you fall in the genetic screenings. And then there's a lot of new things that are coming out in terms of genetics of heart disease, genetics of diabetes. I mean, I think the wave of the future may be if we come out with all of these genetic panels, you may come into the doctor's office with a sheet saying, I'm at risk for this, but not this. So patients may not have to be screened for everything anymore. You might not just have to target everything. We may be able to hone in on where your risk really lies. I'm going to tell you a really interesting genetic story. So I have a patient who, young, 28 years old, came in for her routine annual exam, and I detected a small area in the breast. It seemed to be a little prominent to me. Didn't seem like a big mass, didn't seem like something that really stood out, but it was important enough that I felt like, you know what, let's just get this screened a little further. She lived in New York, and because she lived far away, I didn't want to have to wait a number of months till I saw her back, sent her to have a sonogram, and they actually picked up something. And she went and had a biopsy very shortly after, within the next couple of days. Turned out she did have breast cancer. Well, of course, young, 28 years old, the first thing we do is we screen for genetics, and it turned out that she was positive for the gene for breast cancer. So she has a couple of sisters. One was 2 years younger and another sister 4 years younger. Of course, we get them in right away and screen them. One was negative and one was positive.
Wow. So there's just so much that people can really get, and it's so important for them to go and find out more from the women's health specialist to really find out about all this stuff.
Right.
So we're just going to be closing the show in a few minutes, and I just wanted you to get your, if somebody wanted to reach you, what your website is, if you could just give us that information.
Sure. My website is www.beckermangyn.net or .com.
Okay, that's great. That's great. And as far as like maybe giving any advice, one last piece of advice for young women or older women, is there anything that that you might want to pass on to us?
Be proactive.
Yeah.
There's so many abilities to learn about yourself, to learn about your stresses, to delve into what makes you tick, to look into your family history, to keep yourself healthy. And there's so many things that are coming down the pike now to prevent disease. Don't be afraid to screen. Don't be afraid to be proactive. A lot of times patients say they don't want to know, but I think information is crucial, and I think it gives you choices, and I think it empowers you. So be empowered.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. And so thank you, Dr. Tobie Beckerman, a women's health specialist. I appreciate all the information that you share with us today. And I think that there's just so much more that we can learn. And but these are like really good basics. So thank you so much. I'm Nira Berry, host of Happy and Healthy. And stay tuned, because right after this break, we're going to come back with my Good to Know segment. So be right back.
Once there was a boy who did the same thing again and again. One day, he was told he had autism. He got help and slowly learned how to live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
Hi, I'm Nira Berry, the happiness coach, and I'm going to share with you something that's good to know. And what's really good to know is that when life throws lemons at you, just make lemonade. And really studies have shown that people that have found that silver lining when they've gone through the tough times in their life, that those are the people that actually end up having a really good quality of life. And they find a new direction in their life and find a new purpose and perspective. And this is really what gives you the quality of life. And many of you may have heard of PTSD, you know, whether or not it's the soldiers that have gone through tough times, or whether or not you have personally gone through a tough time, and it's caused a lot of stress in your life. But there's also such a thing called post-traumatic growth. And psychologists coined this phrase in the 1990s. And this is really for people that have really looked and tried to find the silver lining in whatever situation that they're in life. And through this, you find wisdom and maybe a new direction in your life. And this growth is really the backbone to happiness. So even though you may be going through tough times or maybe have had some traumatic event in your life, really see what you can pull out, even if it's a crumb of something good or even like a little strand. Just try to really focus on what good came out of it. Maybe the new direction, new meaning, the growth that you felt. And this is something that really is very interesting, and I think that you'll notice what a happier life you have when you focus on the good and the silver lining of everything. And I'm curious to know what you find out or what you've been going through. So feel free to contact me, Nira Berry, the happiness coach. You can reach me at happyandhealthy@mmctv.org. And thank you for watching. I'm Nira Berry, your host of Happy and Healthy. And I hope you have a happy day.